Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, making a titanium micarta handled knife. So today we'll be making a knife out of a bunch of junk I swept up off the floor. Okay, maybe that's oversimplifying. In reality, today's project will be a titanium micarta handled knife based on my Tactics Armory Agent blade. So a couple of weeks ago, I made some micarta-like handle material using a titanium base. I'm calling it Ticarta. It's pretty cool looking, and you can go to the video that I made a couple weeks ago, link to that in the cards, and that'll explain what I meant when I said that it's made from stuff I swept up off the floor. Okay, enough talking, let's go ahead and get started. So, today I'll be picking up where that video left off, and we'll make a knife from the Ticarta that I made last week. The knife I'll be making is patterned on my Tactics Armory Agent blade. I'll begin by cutting a piece of S30V steel. I've shown a couple of other projects using this very same shape because it's a very simple and versatile knife that most people can make. I think I used 01 high carbon steel in the earlier project though. No law says you have to use S30V. That just happens to be a really high quality vanadium stainless steel that I happen to use a lot. If you're interested in following along in your own shop and making a similar knife, I've got plans with all the dimensions available on my Patreon page. By the way, if you're interested in trying your hand at this project and don't have the kind of equipment that I do, in other videos I show how to do this with much simpler tools. However you do it though, before shaping the blade, I always drill the holes in the handle. I do it in this order because it's easier to support the blade much more firmly in the drilling vise when the steel's still square than when the blade's irregularly shaped. You can buy El Cheapo drilling vices like this for a song, and they really improve the quality of your drilling. If you have a drill press but don't have a vise, I highly recommend that you get one when you get the chance. Now it's on to the belt grinder. I'm using the table on my belt grinder to shape the outline of the blade. Then I shape the finger notch with this tiny contact wheel. Incidentally, I'm actually making a couple versions of this knife, so if you think you're seeing a couple of slightly different versions as we go forward, it's not your imagination. Once we finish profiling, it's time for the hardest skill part of the build, grinding the bevels. I've got videos showing lower skill and less intensive ways of doing this using angle grinders and files and all kinds of things, but this is typically how I would do it. I'm often asked how thick to leave the edge before heat treating. I typically leave it pretty close with stainless steel blades. You're heat treating inside a foil pouch with little or no oxygen, so you don't risk significant decarburization. So I only leave my blades about 5 to 10 thousandths of an inch thicker than their final thickness. In my case, I like most blades to end up between 15 and 20 thousandths on that final edge. Hey guys, let me jump in here to mention that the plans for this project and many of the hundreds of other projects I've demonstrated on this channel are available on my Patreon page. Any Patreon contribution, no matter how small, to help support the work that goes into keeping this channel afloat gives you complete access to all those plans. Link to Patreon right here or in the cards. Now, let's get back and make some more sparks fly. Now we're ready for heat treating. Stainless steels have to be heat treated in specialized heat treating ovens, so I'll be heat treating this at about 1900 Fahrenheit for about half an hour before plate quenching it between two aluminum plates. As I said, I've got another video about the making of a similar knife made from carbon steel, which is heat treated in a very different way. So if you want to make your own from a steel that's heat treatable with less complicated equipment, take a detour to that video in the cards. After hardening, the blade is also tempered twice for 2 hours at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Now bear in mind, if you want to make a stainless steel blade, there are a number of commercial heat treaters, including many of the knife supply houses you can find online, who can heat treat your blade for you. Just ship it to them with instructions on what you want them to do, and they'll ship it back to you when they're done. Once that's complete, I'll remove the scale from heat treat by taping this 320 grit wet or dry sandpaper to a surface plate and then unleashing a little elbow grease. After that's all cleaned up, I'll refine the bevels on the grinder. Sometimes I'll hand sand a blade completely, but in this case, I'll just stick with the look of the ground bevels. Alright, let's turn to the handle material that we made last week. First, I square up my Micarta roughly on my grinder. Then turn to the disc grinder. Again, industrial grinders are not required. You can do this with a hacksaw and sandpaper if you want to. Just takes a little more time. The key to making the handle work is that the holes in the tang and the holes in the scale have to line up absolutely dead perfectly. If they don't, you end up with a huge mess and you just really can't make them work properly. Now there are a ton of different ways to accomplish this task, but here's one relatively simple and low-tech way of doing it. I'll be attaching the blade to the handle with 1/4-inch brass pins, and those will help us out when drilling the holes. By drilling each hole in turn, then using a locator pin to assure that the holes are exactly the right distance, you can go sequentially 1, 2, 3, 4 through those holes and get them all to line up properly. When you flip the blade over, make sure you drill through the previous scale so as to make sure the holes are at the same angle. If you don't, the drill can bend slightly, or maybe your table's off a little, or the scales are out of whack, whatever. It could be any number of things. And that'll cause the holes in the two different scales to come in at slightly different angles, which in turn will make it totally impossible to drive the pin through both scales. After those holes are drilled, I'll face the front edge of the scales here, something that's impossible to do once the scales are attached, so it's got to be done now. Next, it's time to attach our funky little Micarta scales to the blade. If you want to trim the scales with a saw at this point, you can, but a 40 grit ceramic belt will move material plenty fast if you don't. I try to gather all my materials ahead of time so that I don't have to run around the shop while the epoxy is setting. Now it's just a matter of slathering the epoxy on and squashing everything together. I use rubbing alcohol to clean out the squeeze out so that joint with the blade is nice and clean. Some people use baby wipes or you can use other solvents, but the main point is just that you want to get all that squeeze out gone so that you don't have an ugly joint there. Once the epoxy is set, it's back to the grinder to start profiling the handles and bringing everything to the final lines. I'll start with a 40 grit ceramic belt, moving in stages up to 220 grit. Then I'll wrap up with a 3M Gator Grit 65 micron belt. At this point, I'm done with the belt grinder. Now I'll hand sand up to 600 grit. You could easily just quit right here. Now normally I'm not big on buffing, but this material seems like it'll benefit from it. So I'll complete the job by shining up the handle on the buffer. No discussion of buffing is complete without mentioning a safety issue. The buffer seems like a pretty innocuous tool, but it's really one of the most dangerous tools in the shop. You want to brace the knife really carefully and make sure that the buffer won't grab it. When that thing's spinning at several thousand revolutions per minute, it can chunk that knife really hard, bounce off something, and stick right back in you. So you always want to be very cautious when buffing. Hope you enjoyed this project. You know, if there's a general lesson here, it's that there's really no limit to what you can do as a knife maker. Like I said, this handle material is literally made from stuff I swept off the floor. There's probably some old piece of junk lying around in your shop that you could make into a really cool knife. So try it and see what you can come up with. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching, guys. If you feel like you got something out of this video, don't forget to subscribe. Also, click on the link to Patreon for a great way to give back to the channel. Plus, check me out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Links in the description. If you want something sharp and pointy, maybe a gift for yourself or one of the cooler people in your life, check out my Tactics Armory website and pick up one of our tactical or outdoor knives. And finally, if you want to learn to make hamones or Japanese swords, check out WalterSorrellsBlades.com, where you can find videos about how I make hamones, as well as forging, mounting, polishing, and fittings for Japanese swords. Thanks, and see you soon.